All right. So, I guess I attempted this last night, so I have to hit reattempt. When you pull this link up, it should say Unit 4, Part 2 Test Quizzes Review now. There are two things this is going to go over, the inequalities and synthetic division. You should be fairly ready for synthetic division because it was already on Part 1. It just wasn't as big of a part on Part 1. And what's going to happen is if you click through, it's going to be a little annoying. It's going to make you click every single bullet. It's going to only unveil one at a time. You just have to click a bunch here at the beginning. These are the topics on your Part 2 test. Technically, we're using synthetic division, which was in 4.3. And I'll talk to you about evaluating the functions today. That might sound a little out there, like you don't remember how to do it. It's really easy. You just use the remainder. I'm going to talk about it in a second. There is one new type of factoring that we're going to focus on in this section, and that's what to do if there's a number in front of x squared. And that kind of comes into play when we do 4.6. We're going to find the zeros, the max, and the min in a calculator, so you're going to have to type it in. That's why this is the calculator portion. And then you're going to find all roots using synthetic division. So that's where we kind of took a guess. And we were like, oh, it might be 1 or -1. And so we tried both of those using synthetic division. We were waiting to see which one gave us 0 at the end. A lot of these end up having to factor like this afterwards because they have fraction answers. And that happens when you have this. So that's why we're going to kind of have this new type of factoring. I didn't put any of these problems on Part 1 so that we could focus on it for Part 2. I might have a little bit of factoring by grouping, but probably not a whole lot because I like to focus more on this type of factoring. And then 4.8 is, we already talked about this on the first part. It's when you get square roots and i's as your answers. And 4.9 is the inequalities. So really the only things that are new is this type of factoring, typing it into the calculator, and how to actually use synthetic division to solve the problem. We synthetically divided, but that's all we did. We stopped there. We are going to do a Quizizz review today, a paper review tomorrow on paper, and then the test on Friday. Tomorrow I will probably spend at least half of class doing problems with you. I probably won't just make it an open work day like we did last week. I will actually walk you through several of them since we only have that one 50-minute class to review. I promise it'll be enough time that we'll get through most of the review together as a class. When you were talking about inequalities, you're going to sketch the graph just like we did in Part 1. Okay? On this, I'm going to give you that graph because I don't want you to have to do a bunch of work off to the side. That's not really the point of Quizizz. And then if the symbol is facing to the left like these, you're going to want to pick the intervals that are below the x-axis. If it's facing to the right, that's greater than, pick the parts that are above. And then the easiest way to remember that is the less thans point to the left. They both start with L. That's why these go below. And you're going to use parentheses for open circles, which is when you don't have the little line underneath, and brackets if you have the little line underneath. Okay, and that's only on numbers. Infinities will always have a parentheses. I'm going to do the very first one, and then I'm going to kind of randomly click through. This symbol right here is all you care about. I put it in a different color on purpose. I technically put the rest of the equation there for you. It doesn't really matter. This part is saying greater than, so you want the parts above. That's this section, which looks like it goes from -4 to 1. So that's that one. And the last one, which looks like it starts at 2 and goes to infinity. So that's that one. You're probably going to have to pick 2 or maybe 3 on most of them. Okay, then we're to the synthetic division part. Synthetic division is if you're dividing by x and a number. and the opposite of that number is always going to go in the top left box. So if it's x minus 5, then at 5, positive 5 is going to go in the box. The number in the bottom right at the end of your answer is the remainder. 1 second. Okay. If the remainder is 0, that means that the number in the top left is a 0. And so that's how we're going to actually test for zeros, is if we get 0 at the end for our remainder, then it's a 0. If not, then it's not. If it's not 0, then whatever value there is in the remainder, it's equal to what we call f of that number. So if you were plugging in -2, whatever answer you get for the remainder is what you would get if you plugged in x equals -2 into the equation, which is actually easier to do in synthetic division because polynomials get really complicated to type everything in. And then we have an example here. This is the part that I knew if you just looked at it, you would freak out because it's kind of complicated. I'm going to kind of draw a little bit on this. It's a terrible color. So this top part right here, the coefficients are being placed right here. Sorry, I know that kind of crossed through it. So like 1x to the 4th, 3x cubed, -7x squared. So you just list those on the top, drop this first one down, and every number that's down here is going to multiply by this. So 1 times -5 is -5. Add these together. That's -2. -2 times -5 is 10. And actually, I'm going to cross this out because I know I didn't fix it. And then those add to 3, and we keep going. This number right here at the end is the remainder. That means that it is a 0, or f of -5 is 0. If this was 10, then f of -5 would be 10. So if I took -5 and I plugged it into this equation, I would get 0. That means it's a 0. It also means that what we were dividing by is a factor because it went in without a remainder. So you can also use synthetic division to factor a polynomial by taking the answer times what's going to be left here. So what's going to be left here is -4, 3x, -2x squared. So you're just building a power of x as you move to the right. And 1x cubed. Again, we did this part in part 1. We just didn't say any of the stuff that it actually means afterwards. This bottom one is an example that doesn't work nicely. So you end up getting 14 as your remainder. That means that if you took 2 and you plugged it into this polynomial right here, your answer would be 14. So there's going to be a couple of questions on the quizzes that ask you that. It also means that that's not a 0. If f of -2 is 14 instead of 0, then you would have to try another number if you were trying to find a 0. Okay, it's not going to ask you to do this factoring part or to find all the zeros on today's quizzes. It's just going to ask you things like this. If x minus 3 is x minus 3 a factor of the polynomial shown. So here's x minus 3. They plugged it in for us already. Assume the work is correct. We got 0 at the end. That means it is a factor, so you would say yes. If this wasn't 0, you would say no. Things like that. Okay? And that is kind of all that's on the quizzes for today. It's not everything that's on the test. It is just simply enough to get you started.